Hello Flosstube, welcome to my channel, Stitching Jennie. I am Jenny. Today I am filming a tutorial for the fabric for my Jardin Prive Mon Petit Jardin Secret. It's kind of a sky colored fabric. I'm going to try to replicate it today as best as I can, and thought since so many of you were interested in it that I would film a tutorial on how I did it. So what you will need is some containers, some rubber gloves. I use paper cups. These are like the kind that you buy for hot drinks at Costco because I use boiling water. So I don't want regular paper cups because the wax melts and burns your hands. I use Rit Dye Royal Blue and Aquamarine. Mostly Aquamarine, just a hint of the Royal Blue. Just a cheap plastic disposable spoon, and your fabric. Keep in mind that different fabrics take dye differently. So if you're dyeing a Lugana, it's going to take it a lot lighter than some of the others. And also different fabric counts will take dye differently. So today I have a piece of 32 count white linen. This one is from Hobby Lobby. It's the Artiste brand, but it's actually a Zweigert. You can see it says Zweigert here. And this I bought back when there were still coupons because it was cheaper that way. Then I have a piece of 36 count white linen that I bought from 123 Stitch. And I also use a paper plate with a piece of paper towel over it. This is something that I use to kind of help see how dark my dye is. I also have a pot of water that has just barely come to a boil, and there is salt in there. I start with salt in it and then bring it to a boil so that the salt has time to disintegrate or dissolve, I guess is more appropriate. But that is so that it helps hold the dye a little bit more. Keep in mind that if it's not dissolved, you will get some darker speckling on your fabric. So keep that in mind. The first thing we're going to do is run these under some warm to hot water. We're going to rinse out sizing and anything else that's in it that can sometimes inhibit the dye from taking to the fabric. So we'll just do that really fast. I kind of scrub it together a little bit to help get that sizing out, and then I just wring it out. We don't want it soaking wet, we just want it damp. Into my bigger piece. So again, we don't want it soaking wet. It's just, I mean, it's very wet. It's just not dripping. You can see that there's no drips coming, but it is very wet. And we do want to start with wet fabric. I'm going to dry my hands just a little bit. Okay, so the next step is we're going to find a container. We want it the fabric to be kind of squished in there, but not so tight that the dye can't get in. So for this 36 count, I will probably use the small. This is an old Ziploc Tupperware or plasticware, and I'm not going to be super fussy, because what I like to do is do a light rinse on it first, so that instead of it being stark white in the areas that don't get the dye poured over it, it will be a very light blue. So I'm not going to be super fussy this time. The next round I will be. And in fact, this one might be a little big too. So I think we're just going to put both of them in the pan together, which will be fine because I'm using the exact same coloring, which will be great. So next, what I will do is you're going to want to make sure that you shake your dye really well, and make sure that the lids are on really tight before you start shaking. I also tend to wear an apron when I do that, just when I do this process, just so that if it flicks, that it's not ruining my nice clothes. It's just on a apron. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour my hot water into my paper cup. And I do it till it's about maybe an inch from the top. I did measure it just before I started so that I could tell you a more accurate amount. So if you're particular, it's 1¼ cups of hot water, like just simmered almost to a boil to boil. So 1¼ cups, that's also 300 ml on my measuring cup as well, for those that are in other countries than the United States. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my plastic measuring, or my plastic spoon. I use it kind of as a measuring spoon because I don't want to ruin my nice measuring spoons. And I typically will fill this at least one, maybe even two. We'll see how light it is. Keep in mind that two things. When you rinse it, some of the dye is coming out when you rinse it, and it will be lighter also once it's dry. So keep those factors in mind. So I put it on my paper towel. That looks pretty good just for like my quick base. I think I will, because I wished that some of my like areas were just a tiny bit darker on just the regular base, but I'm going to put like 1½ in to start with. And the thing about dyeing to kind of keep in mind is it's very much like a science experiment. There's no, it's hard to replicate exactly. I find that if I go in kind of with an idea, but not super set on how it's going to look, I'm much happier with the results than if I have a very specific look in mind. But, which is why I said, we'll see if I can replicate this, because it's not always exact. Those dyers who do it professionally, they very much have refined it, and I play with it, but I'm not super, I'm not professional, let's just say that. Okay, so then what I do is I pour all of this over my whole fabric. And I want to coat all of it so that everything, there's no white at all left. If it's a smaller piece, sometimes I'll just put it straight into the cup just so that it's getting a nice good dunking. I have a couple of bigger pieces, so I'm going to just do it in the pan, just kind of moving it around, making sure that as I look at it, there are no completely white pieces. Okay, and then what I do is I squeeze it out, and I will tend to put it in another container, so we'll just put it in another container. That'll be easier. It looks messy. So I'm gonna squeeze this all out. And I silenced my phone, but the family phone has not been silenced. So pardon the dings. Okay, so this looks really dark to begin with, but keep in mind as I rinse it, it's not going to stay that dark. Okay, then what I do is I pour this back into, and of course I spilled onto my counter in spite of my tablecloth. Okay, so then I'm going to pour this back into my cup. And the reason I do that is so that I am continually darkening the fabric or the dye that I've already used, so that I know no matter what, it's darker than what I started with. So now what I'm going to do is make sure that this gets scrunched up, because the scrunching is what gives you some of the modeling effect. So I'm just going to take it and kind of scrunch it. No super rhyme or reason other than that I don't want a large space that's flat or a large space that's all poofed up. So I will give you a better view of that once I'm done. Okay. So this kind of gives you the look of what I need. And then I'm just going to put this 36 count piece next to it, since it's going to be the same dye. And I'm going to scrunch it. Sometimes it's harder to scrunch smaller pieces just because all of it wants to go up or all of it wants to go down. So just kind of play with it. Okay, so that looks about right. Okay, so then I'm going back to my Rit dye, and it's got stuff. And I'm going to add another spoonful, pretty full, and I'm going to mix it in again. And this is going to be my medium shade. And then what I'm going to do is just kind of pick and choose spots to hit with this medium shade. I don't want to cover all of it. I'm just taking spoonfuls and kind of just hitting it here and there. throughout. Just kind of thinking as like a sky color. It's not all in one spot, kind of the same color. I want kind of some lighter cloud type look. So I'm just going to be spooning a little bit here and there. Also keeping in mind that these are two different pieces of fabric, so I may want to hit, go back and hit that smaller piece if I didn't realize that some of it is that second piece. Okay, so now my cup is about half full. So I am also going to add probably, we'll probably do a half and kind of see, it was more like 3/4. Yeah, that's a lot darker, which is great. And then this one, I'm going to add just a tiny, tiny bit of the royal blue. So it's almost maybe a 1/4 full. And this will kind of richen it a little bit, give it kind of a little bit different, darker color. You can see this was the blue before I added the royal, and this is it after I added the royal blue. I think that's pretty close. I'm gonna add just a tiny bit more, just because I do want this one maybe a little bit darker than my last one. Okay. Make sure those lids are on tight in case you bump them while you're doing your pieces. You can keep a old washcloth on hand to kind of help wipe up as you go. But I'm just going to mix this in. And I'm noticing that when I opened my royal blue, some of the blue flakes got on my fabric. So hopefully that won't do too much speckling to it. I'm usually more careful. But it is what it is at this point. I can't go back and change that. So and I'm just adding some more of this onto some of the light sections, not if it overlaps a little bit onto that medium section, that's great, but I'm kind of just trying to get a little bit of every color range. Some of these areas are up a little bit higher. Make sure that you're catching some of those because they will end up being a lot lighter because they are up higher away from the dye. That looks pretty good. It may be hard for you to see, but I can see that there's different colorations in that. And I'm just gonna kind of push it down a little bit to try to get all of those upper areas into that dye. It's not super soaked, like there's not like an inch of there, it's just a little bit sitting on the bottom of that dye, water sitting in the bottom of the pan. It's not like above the fabric, if you can kind of see that. It's just kind of sitting in the very base of that. So now we're going to let this sit 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll come back and we will rinse our fabric. Okay, it's been about 15 minutes, so I am going to go ahead and rinse my fabric. Just a couple of things. I typically use cold water when I rinse. It takes less of the dye out. You're just going to rinse it until the water runs clear. If you fear that maybe your dye might be a touch too dark, you can rinse with hot water. That will pull a little bit more of the dye out as you rinse it. So kind of keep that in mind. I typically, like I said, like to use cold water. I also have an old towel that I use. You'll kind of see I like to kind of straighten and dry my fabric a little bit after I am finished rinsing it. I again use gloves at this point so that my hands don't change colors with the dye as it comes out. So I'll go ahead and start rinsing this. I'm going to start with my large 32 count fabric, because I've noticed that some of the flakes have gotten really dark when I opened my bottle over it, so hopefully I can get some of that out. I usually start at one corner and kind of work my way across and down, kind of rinsing each section, making sure that I'm hitting it all. And then I just kind of squeeze it and just kind of keep squeezing it and rinsing it. Depending on the color, depends on how much it takes, how long this part takes. The darker the colors, the longer it tends to take. Just about there on this one. I tend to do it until when I'm holding it in the water, I don't see much color. Then when I squeeze it, there still might be a tiny bit more color, which I'm okay with. You just might want to be careful of what you're drying it above, because there might be still some color. If you're doing different colors of fabric, you're going to want to start with your lightest piece first and work your way to the darkest. Just because your towel will absorb sometimes some of that color if it didn't get as rinsed as you may have thought. Yeah. And I can see that the flakes that came off of my bottle did get on my fabric. You can kind of see this darker flaking here, which I didn't have anything specifically in mind for that, so maybe I can work around it. I just have several pieces that I thought might be good, smaller pieces that might be good to have some sky. Hopefully there's not much, if any, on my 32 count. So I'm kind of straightening this. I pull off any of these extra little strings that come off because this one has not been serged. Just kind of straightening it up a little bit. I'm going to set this one to the side, and then I will work on the 36 count. Again, starting from the corners and working my way down. This piece will be faster because it is smaller. I'm not seeing any of that flaking on my 36 count, which is good because my Memorial Day piece will take up most of this piece of fabric. And I think we're just pretty much there. Yep. Okay. So again, squeezing it out, bringing it over, kind of straightening it out a little bit on the fabric of the towel. This is kind of helping to kind of flatten it, reshape it. This one, you can tell, has a lot more of the lighter colored speckling, which is fine. Hopefully it'll just look like some more clouds from my flags. And that'll be good. And I do see one tiny little piece right here that got the flakes from the bottle. So again, just be cautious as you are opening those bottles that you're not doing it over your fabric. I'm usually much more careful with that. But lesson learned. I typically hang my fabric to dry and then use a hot iron to iron it, and that also sets the color. This time I'm going to try putting my 36 count piece in the dryer. Kind of hoping to shrink it a little bit so that the coverage is just a little bit better than just a plain regular 36 count. So we will go and we will try that, and I will come back once I am all done with that and it's all dry and ironed. So, okay, we have our final results. Okay, just as a reminder, this is what we are trying to replicate, is this. Okay, and this is the 36 count piece. Which I think is very similar. I wanted it just a touch darker, and I think I achieved that, and I'm really happy with the results. So there's that, side by side. And I'm doing it outside so you can have a pretty good feel of what it really truly looks like. So then this is the 32 count. And it's a pretty large piece. So that's how it turned out. And you can see I do have a little bit of that speckling, but I think I can work around it. I think it will look wonderful. And this is the two side by side. And then all three all together. So I'm really happy with my results. I hope that you're able to be successful as well. Thanks for joining me for this tutorial. Bye.